Welcome to the third video. So in the previous video, I covered the European specimens and sites with Homo heidelbergensis. So I will finish up the specimens and site portion of this lecture by going over the African and Asian specimens very quickly. And then I will talk about some of the hypotheses for the archaic Homo evolutionary relationships, how they're related to Homo erectus, how they're related to Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. And so to both kind of start to disentangle that muddle in the middle, but also by showing multiple hypotheses, I am emphasizing the muddle in the middle and how it's still an open question. Okay, so let's go over African Homo heidelbergensis first. Okay, so here are some of the most famous specimens. This one is probably the most famous one. It's from a site called Broken Hill. That's the former name. Now it's called Cobway. So it's the Cobway skull or cranium. It's dated to 400, 300,000 years ago. Even though it's the most famous one, I don't go over it. I do not know why. But yeah, you can even see here double arched eyebrows, right? Brow ridges. I will go over Bodo, which is really cool, and you'll see why, and briefly this specimen from Ndutu in Tanzania. Okay, Bodo. So located in Ethiopia, right, in the Afar Depression or the Afar Triangle where Hadar is, that's where Lucy is found, where the Middle Awash is, that's where Ardipithecus ramidus was found, and it's dated to 600,000 years ago, this Bodo cranium. You can see here the brain size, 1250 cubic centimeters, larger than Homo erectus, smaller than Homo sapiens, and you can probably see here, right, large double-arched supraorbital torus, aka brow ridge, and the face is large in general, and it's still inflated, so you don't have that depression that humans have. Okay, so why this cranium is interesting and why I picked it to cover is that there are cut marks on it. So you can see here, right underneath the left orbit, cut mark, cut mark. And you can see here on the schematic the location of all these different cut marks. So this is obviously the face and the front of the cranium. This is looking down on the cranium, so some here. So is this indicative of cannibalism? And if it is, just like Ant Grandolina in the Sierra de Atapuerca, it's a question of were they just cutting each other up to eat, or was it some more ritualistic, symbolic ritual? Open question. So to illustrate how much morphological variation there is within just African Homo heidelbergensis, we can compare these two specimens. So this one is a Bodo cranium, right, dated to 600,000 years ago. Here's another one from the site of Ndutu in Tanzania, dated to just 400,000 years ago, so just 200,000 years younger. Already visually, you can probably see some differences. Let's go over them together. So here are the brain sizes. You see Ndutu is slightly smaller, no big deal. Bodo, however, has this massive face and this massive nose, whereas Ndutu has a smaller, daintier face and a smaller nose. Bodo has that inflated infraorbital region, right? So again, right, those bee-stung cheeks, whereas Ndutu has that depression, and now I formally named it. It is called the canine fossa. And you can see in humans, here it is and how pronounced it is. So again, if you just feel your face right to the side of your nostrils, you can totally feel that canine fossa. Very indicative of Homo sapiens. And Bodo has this thick supraorbital torus, whereas in Ndutu, it is thin. So Ndutu is actually very human-like, right? It has this gracile brow ridge, canine fossa, smaller face. So even within the African Homo heidelbergensis group, we have such a large range of variation. One is more human-like, perhaps the representative of the population or species as ancestral Homo sapiens. But let's see. So let's summarize all of this. Or not. Okay, I forgot. We're going to go with Asian Homo heidelbergensis. Very quick slide. Here are two sites. Here are two specimens. I just wanted to illustrate here that Homo Homo heidelbergensis is found in Asia. And I mean, here you could even see, right, strong double arched brow ridge, does have that canine fossa, which is more human-like. Rounded, though slightly angled occipital, maybe more similar to its Asian Homo erectus ancestors. Open question. Okay, now we're going to talk about evolutionary relationships. Okay, so out of all the specimens we looked at, some have big brains, but no other derived features. This includes the Bodo specimen, the one with the cut marks on it. Others have incipient modern human features, right? So this is the Indutu specimen I just went over, the one with the dainty face, gracile brow ridges. Others have incipient Neanderthal features, and these are going to be the European ones, the Maurer mandible, right, with that retromolar gap, and Cima de los Huesos with the inflated infraorbital area here, infra meaning below, so below the orbits, and that incipient occipital bun, which you can't see here. Okay, so we have these different specimens. They're telling us different things. So what are some of the hypotheses put forth, right? Again, this being the European group, the African group, although this one not as human-like, but it is older. So you can imagine maybe this more generalized primitive specimen representative group that was kind of ancestral and became more derived as it evolved into this group. Okay, so what to make out of all this? Here's one evolutionary hypothesis. This is that Homo heidelbergensis, the European specimens, the African specimens, they all represent one species, right, that evolved from Homo erectus, and that about 200,000 years ago, they diverged and evolved into Neanderthals on the one hand, and Homo sapiens on the other hand. So this implies that Homo heidelbergensis survives quite late, about 200,000 years ago. So that's one hypothesis. And here is the second hypothesis. So Homo erectus diverged quite early into the European Homo heidelbergensis species on the one hand, and an African Homo heidelbergensis species on the other hand. And so because these are two different species, they should have two different species names. So the African Homo heidelbergensis species is often called Homo rhodesiensis. And the European Homo heidelbergensis species, which includes the Cima de los Huesos specimens, the Maurer mandible, this eventually evolved into the Neanderthals, whereas the African species, which includes the Indutu specimen and probably the Bodo specimen, this evolved into Homo sapiens. So you can see some of the differences compared to the first hypothesis. Well, one is that Homo heidelbergensis is split into two species, but that divergence between the European lineage that leads to Neanderthals and the African lineage that leads to Homo sapiens was quite early, so about 600,000 years ago, whereas in the previous hypothesis, that split was more recent, about 200,000 years ago. So very different. One hypothesis is not more accepted than the other one, thus contributing, again, more to the muddle in the middle. And this question of whether something should be one species or two species is a common one in paleoanthropology. For example, we had Homo habilis. Some think that it should be two species, so we have Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis. That was the answer to the extra credit question on the previous exam. Some think the African Homo erectus specimens belong to a different species called Homo ergaster. And this problem of one versus two species really is a problem of how much morphological variation are you willing to allow in one species? Is it just one species that's extremely variable? Or do you think that, oh, that's too much variation for one species, it should be split into two? So very common problem in paleoanthropology. Okay, so that concludes this video. The next video, we're going to go over Homo heidelbergensis behavior and archaeology.